I had just moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood a few weeks before Halloween. The houses were all decorated with lights and fake cobwebs, but something about this street felt off. I wasn't sure if it was the way the wind rustled the trees or the distant hum of children laughing. I kept telling myself it was normal and tried to ignore it. The first night I walked outside to check on the decorations. I noticed a kid standing at the end of my driveway. He wasn't wearing a costume, just a gray hoodie that covered his face. He held a small, dented bucket, but he wasn't collecting candy from anyone. He was staring straight at my house like he was waiting for something. I waved, trying to look friendly, but he didn't react. His head stayed tilted toward me, and it felt like his eyes could see inside my living room. I called out, "Do you want some candy?" My voice sounded strange to me, weak and unsure. He didn't move. I stepped closer to the porch and set a few pieces of candy on the step, trying to coax him. The kid just slowly lifted his head, still staring, and then vanished. There was no rustle of leaves, no sound of footsteps, nothing. My heart thumped in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching. I locked the door and went back inside, but I couldn't focus on anything else. Every creak in the house sounded like it was coming from him. I kept imagining shadows moving across the walls, shapes that didn't belong. My apartment felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls were closing in. Later that night, I heard tapping at my window. I froze in the living room, staring at the curtain, unsure if I wanted to peek. The sound came again, light but deliberate, like fingernails tracing the glass. My hands shook as I pulled the curtain aside. Nothing was there. Not a person, not a branch, not even a leaf. But I could still feel it, like someone was standing just beyond my sight. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled backward, heart pounding. The air felt heavier, colder, though the heater was on full blast. I told myself I was imagining things. I tried to sleep, but every noise became louder. The wind tapping the windows sounded like footsteps. My cat hid under the bed, growling softly, and I felt a cold sweat covering my back. No, it wasn't just my imagination. Around midnight, I heard a thud in the living room. I crept toward it, trying not to make a sound. On the carpet lay the gray bucket. I hadn't brought it inside. It wasn't outside either. I froze, staring at it, realizing it hadn't been there before. The bucket looked old, scratched, and the faint smell of damp leaves came from it. I picked it up carefully, my hands trembling. Inside, there was a single piece of candy, unwrapped, but it wasn't from any brand I recognized. It felt uneasy, like touching it had crossed some invisible line. The lights flickered for a moment, and I heard a whisper behind me. My head snapped around, but no one was there. I stood frozen, gripping the bucket, heart hammering. The whisper came again, barely audible, almost like it was meant for me alone. I backed into my bedroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my phone. Every minute felt like an hour. I could still hear it, the soft shuffle of feet, distant breathing, a subtle creak in the floorboards. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the kid standing in the doorway, silent, watching. The wind rattled the window panes, making the shadows dance across the room. I told myself I was being paranoid, but my chest ached from the constant tension. By morning, the bucket was gone. I checked every corner of the apartment, even under the furniture, but it had vanished. There was no sign of anyone having entered. I wanted to believe it was some prank, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I couldn't explain it. That evening, I decided to leave the apartment and take a walk through the neighborhood. I figured being outside around people might calm me down. The streets were crowded with kids in costumes, laughing and screaming with excitement. It looked normal, but I couldn't shake the heaviness I felt. As I passed a house decorated with glowing pumpkins, I noticed movement in the shadows. A figure, small and hunched, darted between the decorations. It was wearing a gray hoodie. My stomach dropped. My heart raced as I stopped to watch. The figure disappeared behind a hedge. I told myself I must be imagining things. Maybe the excitement of Halloween was getting to me. But then I saw it again. The hoodie, standing motionless at the end of the street, staring straight at me. There were no kids around him, no one else in sight. He was just standing there, waiting. I tried to keep walking, pretending not to notice. My steps got faster, and I could feel my breath fogging in the cold night air. Every so often, I glanced behind me, half expecting him to be closer. But he stayed in place, used to watching, silent, and still. I reached the corner and turned, hoping to lose him in the crowd. That's when I felt a sudden chill against the back of my neck. Ispunahun, but no one was there. Only the empty street and the flickering lights of the houses. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I ran the rest of the way home, unlocking my door with trembling hands. Inside, everything seemed normal. No bucket, no whispering, no shadows creeping along the walls. But I knew it wasn't over. The air felt thick, almost alive, as if someone unseen was still inside with me. Hours passed slowly. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus, couldn't stop glancing at the windows. Every noise made me jump. The faintest scratching at the front door, the rustle of leaves against the siding, the creak of the floorboards upstairs. I felt them all. I was trapped in my own home. Then, just before dawn, I heard it again, a soft tapping at my window, deliberate and slow. My phone was on the bed beside me, ready to call someone, anyone. But when I looked through the curtain, nothing was there. Only the gray morning light and the empty street. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. That's when I noticed the bucket. It was on the porch step, the same one from the night before. I hadn't brought it in, and it hadn't been there all morning. And inside, there was a single piece of candy, untouched, staring at me like a warning. I stared at the candy for what felt like hours, unsure whether to touch it or not. My hands trembled as I reached toward it, but something in me screamed to leave it alone. The air in the room felt colder, heavier, like it was pressing down on my shoulders. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my jacket and stepped onto the porch, the bucket in my hands. The street was empty, but I could feel a presence watching me, just beyond the glow of the porch lights. My steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing against the pavement. I felt trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. When I reached the end of the driveway, I froze. There he was, the kid, in the gray hoodie, standing perfectly still. His face was hidden in shadows, but I could feel his gaze boring into me. My stomach turned. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground, frozen with fear. He raised the bucket slowly, tilting it toward me, as if offering it. I wanted to drop mine and run, but I couldn't. My mind raced with questions. How did he get there so fast? Who or what was he? I knew in that moment that this wasn't just a kid playing tricks. Suddenly, the streetlights flickered, and the air grew sharp and cold. I could hear faint whispering, like 100 voices murmuring from the shadows. The kid didn't move, yet I felt him approaching, the sound of unseen footsteps on the pavement. My heart pounded, and I felt my sanity teetering on the edge. I dropped the bucket and ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I locked it, and I pressed my back against the wall, trying to catch my breath. The bucket was gone again. I didn't hear any movement outside, but the whispering lingered, soft and insistent. I tried to convince myself it was over, that it had all been my imagination. But every Halloween since that night, I feel the same chill in the air, the same unease. I check the street, and sometimes, just sometimes, I see a shadow at the end of the driveway. He's still waiting, silent, watching. I moved out eventually, but I never forgot that night. Every time Halloween comes around, I remember the weight of that bucket, the feeling of being watched, and the whispering voices in the dark. It's something that stays with you, the memory of something real, something that shouldn't exist, but does. And even now, when I tell people about it, I can feel it. Watching, waiting, just beyond the edge of the streetlights, ready to return. That night changed the way I see quiet neighborhoods, empty streets, and the children who stand still a little too long. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The October air over Willow Ridge had always carried a bite, but that year it felt different, denser, colder, almost metallic. Elena Maurice noticed it the moment she turned onto her street after work. The sky was fading into the dark bluish purple of early dusk, and the first porch lights were flickering on. Halloween was only a week away, and the neighborhood had already exploded with decorations. But something about them made her grip the steering wheel tighter. Every house looked too decorated, not festive obsessive. Plastic skeletons sat propped against mailboxes, but their bones were textured, uneven, cracked like they had once been real. Witches hung from porches with hair that moved like real strands in the wind. Even the inflatable monsters had an unnatural heaviness in the way they leaned. Elena slowed her car, eyes narrowing. Maybe a new decoration company was selling hyper-realistic props. Maybe everyone in the neighborhood had decided to go all out this year. But inside her chest, something tugged a quiet, uneasy whisper that told her she was seeing something she wasn't meant to see. She parked in her driveway and froze. Someone had placed a scarecrow on her lawn. She never decorated for Halloween. She didn't even own decorations. Her front yard was always empty, plain, but there it stood, a tall scarecrow wearing a faded flannel shirt and ripped jeans. Its boots were planted firmly in the soil, as if rooted there. A burlap sack covered its head, jaggedly stitched with a crooked grin that looked more mocking than friendly. She stepped closer. The scarecrow's shirt wasn't faded, it was stained. The boots weren't store-bought. They were cracked leather, heavily worn, the kind of wear that didn't come from a costume store. Her throat tightened. "Teenagers," she whispered. "Has to be?" She reached out, hesitating, and pinched its sleeve between two fingers. It was warm. Not sun-warm, not weather-warm, but she jerked her hand away, heartbeat spiking in her ears. Inside her house, she locked the door, shut all curtains, and tried to shake the image from her mind. But all night, she heard noises outside, soft thumps and shifting sounds. Footsteps moved around the yard. At midnight, unable to sleep, she peeked through a slit in the blinds. The scarecrow had turned toward her house. The next morning, she found it even closer to her porch, just a few feet from the steps. She tried pulling it out of the ground, but it wouldn't budge. It was far too heavy. Something dense filled its body. Not fabric, something weighty and unsettling. She drove to work in silence, mind spiraling. At the office, co-workers talked excitedly about the decorations in the neighborhood. "Those props are incredible," one woman said. "Where are people buying them?" Elena said nothing. When she returned home, the scarecrow stood even closer. Now, it was only an arm's length from her door. That night, she heard movement again. Not random noises, deliberate ones. Heavy, dragging footsteps crossed the deck. A slow, scraping sound slid along the siding. Something tapped lightly on the window glass. She didn't sleep. The next morning, 5 long claw-like grooves ran down the wall outside her bedroom window, and the scarecrow stood on her porch. She called the police. Officer Ramirez arrived, inspected the scarecrow, and took notes with mild irritation. "Kids messing around," he said, but when he pressed a hand against its chest, it sank inward like soft flesh. His face changed just for a moment. "I'll file a report," he said quickly, retreating to his car. Elena watched him leave with dread crawling up her spine. That evening, she turned her porch light on. The scarecrow wasn't there. Her stomach dropped. She scanned the yard, the street, the neighbors' lawns. There was no sign of it. Something moved behind her inside the house. She spun around. Nothing. Only air shifting cold and heavy. Every hair on her body rose. At exactly 8:14 p.m., all the lights in her house shut off. Her phone screen became her only light. She crept toward the kitchen to find candles. Passing the hallway mirror, she caught a shape behind her, a tall figure, flannel shirt, burlap head. She whirled around. Nothing. Her reflection trembled as her phone battery dropped to 7%. A deep thump hit the back door. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Another thump harder. The door shook under a heavy weight. She tried calling 911, but her phone hissed with static. Then a voice whispered softly through it. "Stay!" Her fingers dropped the phone. The back door creaked open. The house filled with the smell of soil and something older, something rotten. A long shadow slid across the wall. Alina backed into the living room, knife shaking in her hand. The scarecrow stepped into view. Its movements were jerky at first, then disturbingly human. Its stitched grin stretched wider as the burlap tightened over whatever was inside. She ran for the front door and flung it open. She stumbled into the street and froze. Every decoration in every yard had moved. Skeletons stood upright in rows. Witches stepped off porches. Jack-o'-lantern figures turned their carved heads toward her. The werewolf on the haze lawn watched from the curb, yellow eyes glowing faintly. The decorations surrounded her, dozens of teams silent, breathing. Her chest tightened in panic. She darted between them, trying to reach the exit of the cul-de-sac, but each time she turned, the figures were closer. Their bodies shifted when she wasn't looking. Something brushed her shoulder. She screamed and spun. A witch figure towered over her, its fingers too long, its robe too real. Its face sagged like skin. She stumbled backward and collided with the scarecrow. Its hand clamped around her wrist cold, heavy, unmistakably human. The burlap head leaned close. A low breath vibrated through the stitches. "Stay," it whispered. She tried pulling free, but its grip tightened. Figures closed in from all sides, forming a ritual-like circle. The world blurred as she collapsed into darkness. The next morning, neighbors stepped outside. A new decoration stood on Elena's lawn, a scarecrow wearing her favorite blue sweater. Its head was covered with a fresh burlap sack, stitched into a crooked smile. It was warmer than it should have been. It stood straighter than a scarecrow should. Still, as death yet learned, by the end of the week, more people disappeared. Decorations multiplied. The neighborhood grew quieter. No birds, no children, no laughter. Only rows of lifelike figures watching from the lawns. People whispered they weren't decorations at all. They were replacements. And every Halloween, they waited for a new one. Someone to add to the collection. Someone warm, someone alive, someone like you. The mirror arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, wrapped in brown paper so old it crumbled at the edges. Daniel hadn't ordered anything. Yet there it was, leaning against his porch, railing like an unwanted guest. He lived alone in a small New Hampshire town where packages rarely went missing, but when he checked the label, his name was printed in faint, crooked ink as if written by a trembling hand. There was no return address. He brought the mirror inside, intending to call the delivery office later, but a strange chill swept across the living room the moment he set it down. The frame was beautiful black oak carved with twisting vines, ravens, and something resembling a screaming face, but the glass held a smoky, shadowy depth that unsettled him. That night, as he walked past it, he noticed his reflection felt slightly delayed. The synchronization was almost perfect, but not quite. Curious, he leaned closer. His reflection leaned closer too, but it felt like it chose to. He stared at himself for 10 seconds. His reflection stared back for 11. Daniel stepped back, blaming fatigue from editing videos late at night. He turned off the lights and went upstairs. Unaware, the mirror faintly shimmered behind him. The next morning, the mirror seemed normal again. He cautiously approached it, relieved his reflection, looked right. With Halloween only days away, he decided the mirror would make great footage for his Haunted Objects episode. Even if it was cursed, his viewers would love it. He set up his camera and began recording. But mid-sentence, he froze. His reflection didn't. On the playback, the delay was clear, subtle yet disturbing. He tried again, raising his hand slowly. His reflection raised its hand faster. His breath hitched. It wasn't lag. It was improvisation. When he backed away, the reflection copied him but tilted its head in the opposite direction, as if studying him. He quickly turned the camera off. That night, he couldn't sleep. The wind howled and the house creaked like footsteps on old wood. Then came a faint tap, 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 tap. like fingers drumming on glass. His heartbeat quickened as he realized the sound was coming from downstairs. He crept to the staircase and heard the tapping grow faster, almost impatient. Moonlight glimmered across the mirror. Something moved inside Ita's silhouette. It lifted its hand and tapped again. Though Daniel wasn't moving at all, he backed away in panic as the shadow pressed closer, its head tilting in a predatory way. Suddenly it turned as if looking at something behind him. Daniel spun, but nothing was there. When he looked back, the mirror was normal again. The next day he called an antique appraiser, but no one answered. The delivery office had no record of any package. He searched online for the mirror's carvings, but found nothing similar. Halloween crept closer as the mirror felt heavier and colder in the house. That night, he dreamed of standing before the mirror, but it showed him last Halloween pumpkin hoodie, jack-o'-lantern, decorations from the past. The mirror wasn't reflecting now. It was reflecting then. When he woke shaking, he ran downstairs. His reflection seemed normal, another version of him faded behind it. Halloween night arrived, and Daniel stayed inside with all lights on, the mirror covered with a blanket. Near midnight, the power went out, drowning the house in darkness. He heard the whisper of fabric sliding. The blanket had fallen off. The mirror was uncovered. Inside it, Last Halloween played again. Last year Daniel carved a pumpkin, smiling, unaware. Daniel reached toward the glass, but his past self couldn't see him. Someone else could, a tall, thin figure lurking behind the mirrored version of the room. The creature turned toward the real Daniel. It approached the past version of him like a predator. Daniel pounded on the mirror, screaming, but no sound carried into the mirrored world. The figure reached for Lestier Daniel's shoulder. The mirror shattered. Police later found Daniel unconscious among black shards. The mirror had vanished, leaving only an indentation on the floor. He recovered but never made Halloween videos again. He removed every mirror from his home, kept windows covered, and refused to be alone at night. Sometimes he still saw movement in reflective surfaces, and one October 31st, while washing his hands, he saw himself wearing last year's clothes, smiling, carving a pumpkin, and behind him something watching.